Hi, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and I'm talking today about culture and culture transformation in particular. I'm doing a series about transformation. And last week talked about all the different ways that business transformation could be taking place, talking about culture. And next week, we'll talk about a chief transformation officer. But today, I want to talk about culture. And the reason here is that because there's a famous quote, I'll just put up a fun little graphic here from Peter Drucker, who is attributed to be have said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, I called up the Drucker Institute because I love this quote. And I said, did Peter Drucker actually say this? Because I can't find it anywhere. And they confirmed that it's attributed to him. And he may have said it, but they can't find any actual proof of it. So the reality is, this is something that's really seeped into business, especially made famous by Mark Fields, who was his former CEO of Ford. And the whole idea is that no matter how good your strategy is, no matter how brilliant the actual formulation of that strategy is, unless you have a great culture, you're not going to be successful because the success depends on how strong your culture is to be able to execute on it. And so what I want to talk about today is this, is how do you actually create a culture that is going to be able to actually execute on this transformational strategy that you put together. So I'd love for you to share where you're coming from and then also share how you have nurtured your culture to really be able to support transformation and change. I talk a lot about disruption, and disruption leads to a form of transformation in the organization. So, what does your culture look like? Is it as strong as you think it is? And if it's not, what are the things that you can do to make it as strong as possible to be able to support your culture? So, a couple things. First of all, just a few minutes of definition. Strategy. What is strategy? It is simply your organization's expression of where you want to go. You are here today. You want to get to here tomorrow, or some point in the future. So, what are the things that you're going to do? And very importantly, what are the things that you are not going to do to be able to get there? And so, if you think about strategy as the road that you have agreed to travel on together, what does that road look like? What are the twists and turns and the bumps and obstacles you're going to anticipate along the way? And you have a plan of how to get there. Now, the reality is that road is usually not very straightforward. A lot of obstacles keep coming in, landfalls and floods will happen, and whatever will be, you may have to take detour. And that's where culture becomes really important. Because along these roads, if you have a really good car on that road, you can go pretty fast on it. But if your car's not reliable, it's not dependable, you have a bad map, people are arguing in the car about what direction we should be taking, you're not going to get there very quickly. So, culture, I think, is what determines how fast you can go on that road. And culture is made up of all of your expressed values, your beliefs, the guidelines and guardrails. And it's also an agreement, an assumption of what you all share together. What are the norms and assumptions of not only what you will believe, but also how you will behave? So, this is so important because if you're going through a transformation, you're going to go from here to there. How strong is your strategy, but also how strong is your culture? And what I find oftentimes in my work with organizations is that they have a great strategy, fantastic strategy, put all the pieces together. And then they go, well, what are we going to do about culture now? They think about culture as an afterthought. And I actually believe that culture should be the very first thing. Who are we? What do we believe? What do we stand for? What are our values? Because if you don't know who you are as an organization, if you don't know how you want to be together, then there's no way you can agree on what you're going to do. So you must be before you can do. And that's what I love about this quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we have to think about culture first, not second or afterwards. But do we even have the culture capable of driving that strategy? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do this. I've got lots of great quotes here from companies, from people. So Knox says, strategy plans, culture executes. I love how this is going. Um, and I'm having some questions about the video. If you're having problems with the video, I hope you can go through and see it. Hopefully it's coming through. It's coming through on my end. But at least you have the video, and hopefully you can see some of the things too as well. So let me know. I'm seeing the comments here. So it looks like it's coming through. Okay, great. So I have just one other comment from Knox saying that culture should not be an afterthought, but the strategy people do not think about execution. And I think that's a general point. And yes, it's great to put together the strategy, but how will you actually execute it? So a couple of things that I'd like to do is to go in and talk about why this is so important. Because when it comes to transformations, one of the most important things you have to think about is really how do you actually create the transformation if you think about it as a pivot from where you were before. But also the culture needs to do double duty. That it's, again, most cultures are about keeping things the same, running things and executing on things. But the strategy actually requires that you pivot to a new place, to a new strategy. And then you have to actually persist with that strategy, persist with that change. So it's interesting, cultures that are really good at transformation, and especially really big transformations, are the ones who can not only pivot, but then can also persist. And being able to do both is a real challenge. So I want to talk a little bit today about what that actually looks like and why this is so hard. And one of my best illustrations of this is, I love this graphic that I have called the messy middle. And when you're going through a change, you're leaving where you are comfortable and know where things are. And you know you have to change because you're going to a future where things are going to be better and different because the market is determined, customers want it. You anticipate the world is going to change, so you want to go there. And in between is this beautiful, glorious space that's really messy. In psychological terms, we call it the liminal space. You're going through this threshold, and as you're going through this change, you can feel unanchored, untethered. And culture is what ties people together and allows you to stay aligned throughout that change. And I think this is so important because when we think about the real challenge of transformation is, can you go from one place to the other and not fall completely apart? And that's why I think culture is such an important part for transformation. And we think about it way too late in the process. As you anticipate going through this change and you're putting your transformation plans together, then what are elements of your culture that need to be there to be able to take care of each other, to be able to create that psychological safety, that sense that we have confidence that we can go through this messy middle and be okay? Because that's what confidence is. It's not about knowing that you're going to be successful, but knowing that you're going to be okay as you go through this journey and will come out the other side. So I want to give you one of my favorite examples of how culture really makes a difference. And that is with the USS Nimitz. I had the honor of going onto this aircraft carrier and it's spending 24 hours on board, along with 15 other bloggers and other thought leaders and influencers. And one of the most interesting things here is that we were a little bit worried that we might be censored. They may not let us talk to people. They'd be highly controlled because it's the military, right? They run things by the book. And what was so interesting is that they said, no, come on board. This is your Navy. Ask any questions you want of anybody. And so that's what we did. And what was interesting is it became so clear that the 5,000 people that are on this ship, again, it's a floating city, basically, 5,000 people made up primarily 18 and 19-year-olds were so clear about their mission and their purpose. And they had a very strong culture, the ways of doing things, of process, of structure, and also of something that I call lore. And I'll talk about that in a second. The rituals, the stories they tell each other. And this culture is so strong that you can take one service member from one aircraft carrier and have them join another aircraft carrier, and it's the same culture. So being able to transport cultures between ships, again, they're all unique and different, but they have the same underlying structure to their culture to be able to move people back and forth very quickly and be able to fall in and function very efficiently. So what was really interesting is that the 16 of us went on board and we kind of went like this, poof, all over the ship. after our guided tours. They said, okay, you're free to wander anywhere you want. We're at sea, so you can't get lost. Just don't fall off the ship. And so we wandered around and we literally stuck our microphones and our video cameras into anybody who would talk to us. And they talked to us. And they told us the most interesting things about their journey to get to that point, about what it meant to be part of that team, how they were growing, the challenges they had. They were extremely honest and authentic. And here's the question: is your culture strong enough to let me, let alone 16 of us, walk around your organization for even an hour? What would people say? Would they know what the mission is, what your strategy is? Would they be able to tell me that? Would they be able to express it? And the way I think about this is, can every single one of your employees answer these three questions? And I think it's so key, because if you can understand who your future customer is, then you know what your strategy is going to be. Can people express what that strategy is to meet the needs of that future customer? And very importantly, do they each understand their role in making that strategy a success? This is what makes a strong culture, and why culture is so clearly aligned with strategy. Because if you don't have a culture where everybody can understand this, your strategy is clearly aligned, everybody up and down throughout the organization, then there's no chance that you'll be able to execute it. And so strategy becomes a really important part of this. So I want to take a little break before we go into all of this, and just see if there's any comments. We have one here. Again, we have Knox saying exactly, psychological safety is absolutely key and crucial to having a really strong culture. Because if people don't feel safe, they're not going to put their best foot forward. They're not going to raise their hand and say, hey, I think we could be taking a different route, if they're going to be afraid of being shot down. And then we also have this comment from Christopher. Now that we are growing and people from other companies are coming and going, the Christopher's organization is working on internal culture initiatives to keep the culture clear and strong for the growth and for the future. That's interesting, Christopher, because we know that when people come in, it's so easy to morph your culture. And so we want people to come in and not necessarily be a culture fit, but be a culture add. But then it also requires that you're constantly shaping and nurturing your culture so that it's going in the right direction that you want it to be. So let's go through and talk a little bit more about some of the things. I talked about the three questions. And one of the things that I do believe, again, I talked about this a little bit earlier, that culture is just made up of two things. Again, there are purpose and values and things, but in the end, it's really about, what do you believe, and how do your beliefs shape your behaviors? Or similarly, how do your behaviors, because you adopt new ways of working, change your beliefs? And this is the point from Christopher, that when you bring new people in, they bring their own beliefs of how things should work. They bring behaviors and ways of working. And norming that with your culture, and shifting your culture as you bring people in, it always is constantly changing. So your job as a leader, especially if you're trying to formulate a culture that is going to be capable of creating that transformation and making it stick, is what pieces of this culture are really serving you, which parts are not serving you. Because over time, your culture can shift. And one organization I worked with, a fantastic manufacturer, was working on a new strategy, putting out new products, being basically data-enabled products. And one of the things they had as one of their key tenets, their key beliefs, was this value of respect. And over time, that value of respect had morphed into this kind of bizarre thing where nobody felt like they were comfortable challenging the most senior person in the room. So if the senior person says, I think we should do this, everyone goes, okay, yeah, sure. And if you disagreed, you had to go around the back and talk to people and finesse it and say, maybe we can consider a different perspective. Let me be a devil's advocate, and be really careful about that, because that's what respect meant. And they realized this was holding them back. If they wanted to transform the company with this beautiful new strategy around these new products, they realized they had to change their culture, because it was not going to support, especially the speed at which they needed to work. So they took the time to actually redefine this belief and value of respect, and shifted it, turned it on its head, and said, no, respect is about the fact that everybody has a voice. Everybody needs to be respected for their opinion and for all the experiences they bring in. So they went back to the founders' ideas, videos, his writings, and said, okay, here are examples of what respect looks like. They pulled out the stories, created new stories to, again, change this belief. And systematically, intentionally, and very strategically, they changed that belief to a new value of respect. So the question becomes, what are these beliefs that are there? And I just love this slide. What beliefs are holding you back in your culture right now? What's keeping you from the type of transformation that you want to have? What are the elements of your culture that are holding you back? And I did this about 2 weeks ago, where I talked about the limiting beliefs, and they came into four areas: fear around failure or fear for yourself. Again, the lack of psychological safety was a big, it's like the number one thing I hear from people when we do this exercise. Some people feel like they're stuck. Well, this is the way we've always done things, so we'll just keep doing that. Or there's no way that my voice, my opinion is going to make any difference. Those are, again, limiting beliefs. There were beliefs around resources. We don't have the time. We don't have the money. We don't have the people. We have the wrong people. My team isn't motivated. The resources that we have just aren't the right ones. So we can't do these new transformative things. And a really interesting one was when the leaders said, oh, I'm the biggest problem. My belief in having to be in control, that I need to be in the middle of everything or else things are going to go wrong. So this inability to step back, to have confidence and trust in the team to be able to go do the things that they are there to do. So really, I think in many ways, the question becomes, what are the beliefs that are going to move us forward? What are the things that we really want to believe and have? Because if we don't have those beliefs fundamentally in our cultures, we're not going to be successful. And I thought I'd share just some of the beliefs. Again, this is maybe as big as possible. Some of the beliefs of disruptive organizations that I have found in my research. The first one is that there's a strong sense of openness, that transparency, and it comes from this belief that everything is shared, nothing is left in the dark corners, and that when you have this transparency, there's accountability that comes on board. So everyone knows what everyone is doing. There's no hiding, but it also encourages people to say, no, this isn't working, and can you all help me? And instead of looking like you're weak, it's seen as a strength because you are confident enough and trust the people around you enough that instead of being shot down, people are going to come to your aid. And this happened at Ford, where people were really in their own little silos of their operating units. There was Mustang here and Lincoln there, and everybody was kind of, well, good luck to you, but I'm working on my own business here. And Ali Mullally, when you turn around Ford, really stuck it to people and said, look, we're one team here. We're one Ford. I want you to come forward with when things aren't working, because otherwise, how can we fix it? So one person came over and said, yeah, we're having this manufacturing problem and we don't know what to do. And somebody else said, oh, we had something similar. I'll send you 2 engineers over. They can help you take a look and show you what we did. And somebody else says, oh, well, we had that problem with this product. There's some downstream things that you have to think about. So we'll send some people over there and help you with this. And slowly but surely, people started working together. But it required this sense of openness, this belief of openness, of sharing and trust that comes from that. I'll quickly do the other two. Agency is another big one where people really believe that you have a sense of ownership, that every single person feels like they're an owner. And this is so important because if people don't believe that they're owners, they'll just sit there and not be participants. And when you're going through a transformation, you have to have that. And then finally, there's a strong bias for action. So the bias for action, again, is this belief that your customers in the future is moving further and further away from you. So we have to go faster and faster to be able to catch up to it. And you can't be waiting for things to happen. So a couple great comments today. So we have Christopher chiming in here. We also consider very important. I'm glad you like that culture ad instead of culture fit for new hires. It's one of the most interesting ideas I've heard along the way, thinking about how do you look at somebody who's unique and different and is saying, are they going to fit in? You go, wait, is that going to be something we need in our culture? This person's going to really challenge us and move us in the direction that we need to move. And then let's see, we have control being an issue. So Knox has some comments here. Would have thought that control would be bigger than psychological safety. Actually, it is. Again, just different audiences in some ways, because control, openness, all these things come together. And then working from these mindsets of being closed and stuck are really key. So let's see. Let me just go on and talk about just a couple last things, because how do you actually build this culture? Now, there are things that you can do on your structure. Oftentimes people think, okay, if I want to change my culture, I'm going to have to do a restructuring organizationally. Sure, you can do that. Getting people aligned, working together, putting in new processes, for example, around agile, and looking at the way you work, the processes to hardwire it. So I think of these as hardscaping your culture. You have structures that create opportunities for people to collide and work with each other and talk to each other. Working groups, matrix organizations, clear structures, flattening hierarchies. Those are all great things that structure can do. And you can also change the processes of how things work. Again, that's hardscaping. That's hard landscaping that you put in. But I think lore, this is the softer side. You can't really put on a piece of paper what lore is, Lore. Let me just put this up here. There are 3 parts of lore. These are the rituals that you practice to bring people together, to remind each other these are our common beliefs. This is how we want to be with each other. They're the symbols that, again, represent those beliefs. And of course, there are the stories that we tell each other. So I'm going to give you a couple quick examples of these, and then we'll sign up for today. So rituals, the reason why rituals are so important is that they create belonging. And I love this. These are the New Zealand Blacks. They're the rugby team, and they do this amazing chant. It's Aboriginal chant, and it's really intimidating. And it gets them as a team completely excited about the challenge coming the way. And also the fans go crazy around it. And you can imagine being on the other side of your opponents going, okay, this is a team. So other teams started adopting their own rituals around this too. But it's a strong sense of belonging, of who we are, a definition. And we have rituals in all parts of our lives to denote changes that are happening. They help us understand change. We have rituals around marriage and graduation, around death in our personal lives. We have rituals at work when we welcome people, or goodbye drinks, go away drinks, celebrations of anniversaries, celebrations of big achievements. So we have rituals, and in many ways we've gone away from rituals. So if you want to change your culture, think about the rituals you can put in to signify the different parts of your culture that you want to emphasize. Another great one is thinking about symbols. This is from OXO. They make these kitchen gadgets that are just really great designed. And if you go into their office in New York, they have this wall of gloves, and it symbolizes all the different types of hands of people. They're big hands and small hands, old hands and young hands, arthritic hands, hands that are maybe have some emotion issues. So it's a reminder to everybody in the office that we're designing these tools, we're selling these tools for very, very different people. It's a way to think about their customers constantly, and that to think about the hands that we're holding these products that people are making. So symbols can be really powerful to remind us of who we are serving, our values, our strategy and objectives. And of course, there are stories. There's no better story than, I think, the Post-it notes. The 2 people at 3M, the company that defined this, just randomly met. One person was an engineer who had a glue that didn't work, frankly. It was kind of stuck things, but not very well. And the other person was another engineer, but was a choir master in his personal life. And he hated having to put the pieces of paper into the hymnal, and then they would keep falling out, so he'd lose his place. So he was talking about this, and the engineer goes, what if you put this glue on the back of your little pieces of paper, because they're easy to pull in and out? So they made a stack of these. They went to the local printer and got these made. They only had yellow paper, so they just used yellow paper because it was cheap and easy to use. And 3M actually hated the whole idea, didn't like it. And so they persisted with this idea, made up a batch, and gave them to all the assistants inside for these executives. And all these executive assistants loved them, and they ran out, went to the executives, well, we need more of these. So it's a great story about innovation and transformation inside a company. And so these stories give arcs to the people and inspire us to overcome obstacles. So think about the stories that you have in your past. Think about the stories you want to create, the stories you want people to be telling, because people will not remember facts and slides and data points. They will remember stories. And more importantly, when they take that narrative and make it their own and make it their story, see themselves in that story, that's when it becomes truly powerful and becomes transformative. So, stories, symbols, ritual, these are all amazing things, but they all go back to the importance, again, of how culture can really be that engine. I just want to reinforce that again, that this is the key, that as you're thinking about transformation, think about the culture you want to create. And I encourage you to start with this simple exercise. Look to the limiting beliefs of your organization. Sit your organization down. The top leaders could be your team, whoever it is that you want to center on this, and get post-it notes out. and it's just like, little post-it notes and just write on them, hopefully bigger ones than these, but just write on them in silence individually. What do you think are holding you back? What are the things that you are doing and saying and believing around uh, the things that are challenging you? And write down those limiting beliefs and put them in the middle of the table, and then start talking about this. What is it? What are these beliefs that we have in common? And I guarantee you, you'll find a couple, one or two, that you go, that's not serving us anymore. And then have an agreement that you're not going to believe those things, and that you're going to instead create new beliefs that will serve you, that will create the culture that you want to have to drive your strategy. My parting point here today is that if you are not working on your culture, then your culture is not going to work. If you're not working on your culture is not going to work, because you have to constantly be vigilant. Do I have the culture that I really need? Are we creating this on a daily basis? Because unless you're intentional and thoughtful and mindful about how your culture is being shaped, it will go off the rails into other directions that you do not want to go to. So be very intentional about your culture in the same way you are intentional about your strategy. All right, so that's what I have for today. I hope you will join me next week, where we'll be talking about why it's imperative to have a chief transformation officer, or maybe you don't actually need one. But I think in many cases, you need somebody, if that's not the only role that they have, somebody who's thinking about how you're going to transform your business, regardless of what industry, what stage you are, what size you are. You need somebody to be thinking about how are you going to transform the organization. We'll talk about that next week. So until then, I wish you all the best. Thank you again for joining. Your viewership, your audience, your thoughts, especially your comments and questions are incredibly helpful. So thank you again for taking the time to watch and to listen. All right, have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks.